There is a classical story by Rav Nachman of Breslov, which a lot of his stories are inaccessible. They're very, very complex, and they usually end in the middle. And the symbolism is very deep and complex. This story is more simple, but I think it raises very, very fundamental issues, and issues that are, even in our world, are very fundamental. And they're issues which are usually hidden from people. They are not aware of what they're missing. They're what one politician called unknown unknowns. It's not so terrible if you're aware of what you don't know. If the need comes to make a decision, you can try to fill in your missing knowledge. But if you're unaware of what you don't know, then you go ahead blindly and you have no, thank you very much, and you have no way to correct your ignorance. At any rate, the story goes like this. There once was a king who had a son, a prince. Let's say the prince was 15. And he suddenly manifested a severe psychological ailment. He took off all his clothes and started crawling around the ground, crowing like a chicken. I mean, this was horrible. The prince, of course, they called in their doctors and their wise men. Nobody could do anything. Nobody could affect him, talk to him. They tried pushing him or starving him, or it made absolutely no difference. He just behaved like a chicken. So a general call came out, the king is suffering and there's this terrible problem in the palace. Anybody who can help is invited to please come and help. So a rabbi comes and says, I think I can help, but my procedure is radical and it will appear strange, it may be counterproductive, so I want you to guarantee me that you won't interfere with my efforts to help the prince. Well, having no alternative, they do give their guarantee. Whereupon, the rabbi takes off all of his clothes, and gets down on his hands and knees, and starts crowing like a chicken. So now there are two of them, the prince and the rabbi. And this goes on for a number of days. Hands and knees, crawling around, crowing like chickens. One day, the prince wakes up and he sees that this older man, whoever he is sitting on a chair. So he says, wait, what's going on? I thought you were a chicken, just like me. So I'm a chicken. What are you doing sitting on a chair? And the rabbi says, I am a chicken, just like you. Couldn't a chicken sit on a chair? I'm a chicken sitting on a chair. So the prince thinks it over and he says, chicken could climb up on a chair, a chicken could sit down on a chair. Why couldn't a chicken sit on a chair? So he says, okay, yeah, right, fine. Crowing like a chicken, sitting on a chair. Next day, the rabbi put on his shoes. So he says, what are you doing with shoes on? I thought you were a chicken. He says, what? The chicken has feet, and the feet could be covered by something. I'm a chicken with something on my feet. So the prince says, yeah, I guess so, good, right? The point of the story is that step by step, he takes the prince back into all the trappings of human life, and in each step, he says to him, why couldn't the chicken do that? What's wrong with it? Knife and fork, with the dexterity of a wing, you could learn, you could train them, get a Skinner box, and give them conditional reinforcement, and they'll be able to use a knife and fork. And at the end of the story, the prince is behaving just like a human being, fully convinced that he's a chicken. End of story.
What was the principle that you said that represented?
I didn't say it.
Oh.
I didn't say
You
it.
said before. You said the story, there was a principle. It was when I went to get the water.
Oh, no. I was talking about something else before I got to the story.
Oh.
I didn't start the story till you got in. So the question that's raised on the surface of the story is it possible for person, not to know what he is? To have learned certain ways of behaving, certain ways of acting, and not to know what he is. So the story portrays it in extreme terms. He thinks he's a chicken. Is it possible for a human being to make a really big fundamental mistake about what he is, and yet get along in life, manage to do the things he wants to do, and yet be very mistaken as to what he is? Well, first of all, that's worth thinking about. Is it possible to make a mistake like that? And I think you don't have to go too far to see how it is possible, because you have different philosophies that have very different pictures of what a human being is. And let's say you have two, A and B. So there are only three possibilities. Either A is right and B is wrong, or B is right and A is wrong, or they're both wrong. But in any of the possibilities, half the people in the world are making just that kind of mistake. Because if the A position is right, then all the people who think they're B are profoundly mistaken as to what they are. So it definitely is possible. And once you know that it's possible, then you have to meditate on what are the consequences of getting it wrong, what you are. I'm going to give you two pictures which should be familiar to you. And I think you'll see that if one is right, then the people who believe the other one are profoundly mistaken about what they are. And then you'll see the consequences. You'll see why this kind of question is very important. This goes much farther than the identity crises that sophomores and juniors go through in college, so as to get more money out of their parents and sympathy from the college when they flunk their grades. I'm having an identity crisis. I don't know who I am. But he remembers where to pick up his welfare and where to get his money orders from his parents. That he remembers very well. There's one picture of what a human being is that's provided by evolution, where we are the result of evolved characteristics coming from the same ancestry base as all the other living creatures on the planet. And we are the result of small modifications in some kind of ancestor, like say a common ancestor between us and the chimpanzees, maybe according to their phony time scale, several million years ago, and then come to Homo sapiens sapiens, which is to split off some other thing, other hominid that's much more similar to us, which means that our basic material, our basic character is just modified animal character. Even at one time, I don't know if it's still current, they divide up the brain into three sections. One, the ancient reptilian brain, which is the basis of the human brain, and then layers on top of it, which represent later evolutionary additions, but the basis is still there, and it still functions the way a reptile functions. And that's part of what makes a human being what he is. So we are just animals that have evolved uniquely, as every animal evolves uniquely. And we have a totally animal nature with the qualities that this particular direction of evolution took. I saw in a series of essays by Rav Shach. This was translated into English because my Hebrew reading is very slow and I don't read long essays in Hebrew. And I just opened to an arbitrary page. And he says there, the fact that human beings have certain unique qualities make them different from all other animals, doesn't contradict their idea that human beings are animals. Every animal has unique qualities that other animals don't have. That doesn't mean it's not an animal. No animal has a neck like the giraffe, but doesn't mean the giraffe's not an animal. No bird can fly as high as an eagle, which one flies the highest. Extremely strong, sharp eyesight. That's how it can sweep down from the sides and pick up a mouse and eat it for supper. That doesn't mean the eagle isn't an animal. So a human being can think, so what? That's the animal quality that human beings have. That doesn't make it not animal. Now, if you have that picture of the human being, what do you think of the human being's hopes, visions, chances? What do you think of human beings' values or grasp of who he is and what he can do? He's just a slightly smarter squirrel or a greatly smarter squirrel. But his basic nature, his basic material out of which he's built, the history that produced him, is essentially the same history that produced the chimpanzee and the elephant and the mosquito and all the rest of them. We're all just branches on the same tree of life. And that sets our limitations. You have, for example, certain behaviors which evolutionary psychology, this story is so bad, it's so poorly supported, it's so greatly contradicted, I can hardly say it without just laughing. But I'm doing this to create this picture of the two different pictures of what a human being is. So why are men promiscuous? Because they have only one short half hour of activity by which they produce offspring. After that, the offspring are produced without their intervention at all. And women can't afford to be promiscuous because they have to bear the child and they have to suckle the child, and they are the primary source of this child's existence, coming into existence, and survival. So it pays for a man to spread his genes as widely as possible in evolutionary terms, and it pays for a woman to be very selective, particularly selective to a man who will stick with her and help her raise the child. That gives a much bigger guarantee that her child will survive and her genes will be passed to the next generation. That's built into our evolutionary history. So it becomes part of our very nature because of the evolutionary history, because it spreads our genes, and so forth and so on. Contrast that with our picture, where the human being is a combination between soul and body, and the body has physical characteristics. There's some discussion as to what they are and how they operate, how they're related to the spiritual. I'm not going to do that now. But the soul is not bodily at all. The soul is a purely spiritual entity. It's created in such a way that it can be brought into a certain relationship with the body. That's true. It's created so that it can play a role in cooperating with the body or interacting with the body so as to produce human behavior for the sake of a certain goal. And in particular, the soul, which has as part of its essence the possession of spiritual awareness and spiritual value, spiritual aspiration, vis-a-vis the body, which is spiritually blind and morally blind, which sets up a gigantic gap between the body and the soul. And the purpose of the interaction between body and soul is for the soul gradually to transform the body into an ally of spirituality rather than a drain and tension with spirituality. Now, just to understand that the way the drain and tension works has to be described carefully, given what I said, so as not to be mistaken. The body is not anti-spirituality. The body is not anti-morality. The body is blind. So here the body is very much like an animal. You don't blame lions that track down gazelles and murder them and eat them. Because it's an animal. The animal has no moral values, no moral awareness, it just does what it does. It satisfies its desires because it has desires. And the human body is an animal element in that respect. But, unlike all the other bodies in the universe, the human body is connected to something else which can utterly transform that body. Can transform that body into something which attaches itself willingly and enthusiastically to the values of a soul. Through the training that the soul gives it, the body elevates itself beyond that starting point of moral and spiritual blindness, to the point where it acquires the same orientation as the soul. It doesn't become a soul, but acquires the orientation of a soul. Maybe the good model here is taming a wild horse. Wild horses don't like to be ridden. That's what they have in the cowboy shows. And they take a wild horse, and you can tell the cowboy sit on the back of it, bucks and kicks and jumps to get rid of him. Now, through training, the horse becomes docile. There's a relationship between horse and rider which is exquisitely subtle. The rider can just shift his weight slightly, and the horse knows exactly what to do. Not because the horse is beaten into submission. The training process, although it does use force, the training process allows a certain element in the horse's character to take control over its wildness, and there's and the horse appreciates the kindness and the how should I say, the way in which the rider treats it. The rider will give it sugar, the rider will pat its snout, and the horse will appreciate that, and the horse will give every ounce of its strength to do what the rider wants. There's a real relationship of integration between the rider and the. That's a symbol of what can happen to the human body under the direction of the soul. It becomes something which wants to participate in what the soul is doing, to the extent that, according to many Sfarim, the free will ceases to operate because free will requires opposition between two contrasting points of view or contrasting motivations. You can only make a free choice when you have at least two alternatives, each of which you're motivated to do. So you're suffering conflict of motivation, and your free will chooses which motivation to satisfy, and you get to a point where there's no conflict. The body wants what the soul wants. At that point, free will ceases to operate, which is the greatest human achievement. It's not a loss. So it's the ideal human achievement. This picture of human development is utterly impossible from the point of view of evolution. You are an animal, you remain an animal, animal elements are inescapable. If you were to blot out your reptile brain, you would simply die. Without your reptile brain, you can't live. And your reptile brain programs into you certain aspects of your character which are inescapable. And the psychologists pick this up also, that your psychological life is built out of certain qualities, and those qualities have the nature that they do, and they create your essential humanity, and you're stuck with that, and it can't be essentially transformed. According to many, free will is an illusion. You're really just an automaton. You're no more free than a washing machine, and therefore you can't really be responsible in our sense of responsibility for what you do, and therefore there's no such thing as success and failure. There's just what you do, and you do it, and consequences. That's all. The picture of the human being, these two pictures are utterly different from them. Now, there are many people who operate one picture, and many people operate with the other picture. At least half of them are very profoundly wrong about what they are. I think, as you could tell from my presentation, that's a big deal. One thing it tells you is, you don't discover what you are by opening up a secret trapdoor in your chest and taking a look. There is no secret introspection by which you can just take a look and discover what you are. That's an important consequence. You don't know what you are by looking. Because what you see when you look has to be interpreted. It has to be understood. And it's possible for two people to see the same thing and to interpret it and understand it in very, very different ways. So taking a look doesn't help. Charles Sanders Peirce, maybe in a certain sense the greatest of the American philosophers, he founded the school of philosophy called pragmatism. Although he called it pragmaticism for his own reasons. Said, you get to know who you are by observing yourself. The reason you know yourself usually better than other people is because you have a lot more observations to go on. You're observing yourself all the time that you're awake, and other people see 5% of you or less. But it isn't as if you have a secret access to the real essence that other people don't have. All you have is observations of what you do, what you think, what you feel. There are observations like other people's observations. Sometimes people can tell from the way you behave what you're thinking, what you're feeling. So they have information about those things also. You just have a lot more information. But you don't have any special access that gives you somehow the right answer because you are you and you can see it and they can't. No, it's not like that. So now, one of the things that your perception of who you are, what you are, dictates is your aspirations, your goals. If you think that you are capable of profound self-transformation, if you think that reptilian part of your brain is raw material, it can be remolded. Because anything in the physical which doesn't directly express the physical is only potential. There's only one. It won't become a surprise to you that we're monotheists. That means one God created everything. And if it's wrong to say that God's essence is spiritual. That's nonsense. Spirituality is something he created, just as he created physicality. But the purpose of creation is spiritual. Then everything in the world has to be able to serve that purpose. And the evolutionary picture doesn't give you that picture at all. And our picture does give you that picture. So then your aspirations become different. Someone, I forget who said it, said that if Charles Darwin had met Israel Salanter, he could not have taken seriously the idea of human evolution. But he never met Israel Salanter. In more cruel and direct terms, he never met a real human being. He only met failed human beings. A real human being would have shown him that you can't put that kind of behavior into the structure of mere evolutionary development. It doesn't fit. And that means that he had no vision of what a human being could be. So these are two examples of, I would say, like general, universal pictures of what a human being is, which are grossly different from one another, and they're very contradictory to one another. They have a big, tremendous effect on the way in which you organize your life and what you dedicate yourself to. Are we together so far? Now there are smaller and subtler mistakes that can be made, which aren't quite so dramatic, but do have an important effect on your aspirations. To what extent is it possible for your behavior to come under your control? Let's say using our point of view. It's not obvious what the answer to this question has to be abstractly. If you look into the sources, you can see it. It's not obvious. A person could say, Kodesh Baruch Hu creates people with, they could say, let me put it as a matter of discussion within our sources. Does the Kodesh Baruch Hu set limits for different people? Does he say, I want this person to work on this particular challenge, so I'm going to give him certain gifts, and give him certain obstacles, and that's where he's going to be. That's what his life is dedicated to, which would mean that he can't get beyond that, because that's what he's created to do. Or no, really everyone can Now, I'm prejudicing by using the terminology. Everyone can get to the top. No one's stuck at a particular level of development. And that being the case, everyone should shoot for the top. Is there one top, or are there many tops? Could there be different spots at the top, and they're all equally valuable? Or no, there's only one, and if you are starting off with natural abilities that are very distant from acquiring that top position, then you have to say either, well, because Baruch Hu wants me to make a bigger effort, and he gave me the means to make the bigger effort, because everybody can make it to the top, or no, he wants me to climb, if the top is at 100, he wants me to climb from 50 to 70. That's my job, that's what I was put here to do, and if I climb to 70, that's a perfect success of a life, and other people climb from 70 to 90, there are a few people who are meant to get to 100. What is the essence of your capabilities and your challenges, which will then determine your aspirations, your hopes, and your evaluation of your life as success or failure? Here, it's an essential element of who you are, an element of who you are, not the global picture of who you are. The element of who you are, it's self-identity, self-knowledge, which will have a very important effect on how you choose your battles and what you set as your standards. So you want to have an identity crisis, am I meant to help the starving people in Biafra? Leave that for your liberal friends who are still taking drugs on campus. Here's a question of who am I? What am I really? Which is really important for how you set your aspirations and what you think your limits are. Now, if you'll take, I mentioned this to some of you the other day, take the Ramchal and Mesilas Yesharim, maybe I talked to them about it the other day, I can't remember what I said where. In chapter 26 of the Mesilas Yesharim, The Path of the Just, where he says that you can be a chassid in three different ways. And a chassid is the highest possible spiritual attainment. And it can be a chassid by learning and teaching Torah all the time, or it can be a chassid by running your own business, or it can be a chassid by being a hired worker. And all three achieve chassid. So that tells you there are different slots at the top. Being chassid is at the top, and the chassid hired worker and the chassid Rosh Yeshiva are equally at the top. And neither one is higher than the other one. Because the top is chassid, and the hired worker makes it to chassid. So it means that means everyone should strive for the top of spiritual achievement, which is chassid. And there are different ways to arrive at a top, and then you have to do some introspecting and taking counsel with others. Where's my top? What am I suited for to shoot for at a top, which will fit me? It'll be different from other people, and not to give up with a partial achievement. Now, of course, this is gradual, and since it's gradual, you can set a partial achievement from between now and next year, and even there, you should keep your eyes open. The Chazon Ish, in his Sefer Emunah B'Tachon, which sometimes could be translated faith and trust, says that since the HaKadosh Baruch Hu is all-powerful, because he's all-powerful, your picture of the future must have an empty box with a question mark in it. If you have a picture of how the world is going to develop, then you are denying that God is all-powerful. Because if he's all-powerful, he could do something totally unexpected and produce a result that you don't even dream of. No one dreamt that in 1990, the whole of the communist Europe would collapse. Just going down the drain. Nobody dreamt of that. The dictator of East Germany said, East Germany will be here for 1,000 years. It's reminiscent of what another dictator said, right? Until he crashed in 1945. The Third Reich will last 1,000 years, right? They just, in 6 months, it was over, gone. So that means also for your own personal development. I'm sitting here, these are my gifts, these are my shortcomings, these are my limitations, these are my resources, so by next year, I'll only be there. Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe you'll meet somebody, maybe you'll get an opportunity to join an educational institution, maybe you'll read a book that will change your whole perspective. You can't predict the future. You can talk about probabilities, and you should take them into account. You shouldn't flip a coin for the future. But on the other hand, to set limits, It's just utterly unrealistic. Utterly unrealistic. Think of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva's story teaches us that a man at 45 who's illiterate could become one of the greatest Jewish scholars of all history. Because the future is open-ended. It can happen. So the goal is to have that picture of the top and have it in mind, have it in sight. Of course, as you grow and come to understand better, the picture changes. There's not static. But have a picture at the top and think, that's what I'm aiming at. And to sort of guide your progress in that direction as best you understand it. Sometimes the detour, this famous story in the Gemara where one of the Amorim was traveling. He wanted to get to a city which was in the distance, and he met a young boy, and he said, which way is the way to the city? And the boy said, there are two ways. There's the long, short way and the short, long way. So the Amorim looked at him, what kind of joker is he? What kind of nonsense is that? Short way, short, long way? So he decided to take the short, long way. Well, what he discovered was that the route was straight to the city, but there were very, very difficult obstacles to overcome. And it was extremely difficult. He gave up halfway there, and he came back. He went the other way. The other way was very roundabout, but smooth and clear, and no obstacles at all. He met the boy again and said, now I understand you. I understand that you're really wise. You told me something. Yeah, this is the short, long way, and this is the long, short way. Yes, that's right. That's what they are. So you say, I've been forced by Providence into a detour, and I like COVID. We had a guy here. He told us a story. He wanted to come to yeshiva, and he had his ticket, and then COVID struck, and there were restrictions and everything else, and he couldn't come. And then there was 2 or 3 months of certain things happening which he couldn't control, and he was pushed out of this and had it up there. And then all of a sudden, it opened up, and he came. He thought to himself, what happened over here? I was lost. I thought my whole year was going to be wasted, and then, totally unexpectedly, I ended up here. So you set the goal, you pick a slot at the top, you think of ways to operate there, and then you keep your eyes open for the Chazanish's question mark. Maybe something will happen. When you know there's a question mark, you look at the circumstances differently. You see, to a great extent, what you expect to see. This is borne out in psychology. There's a famous test of a whole page, and you're asked, what's unique about this page? First of all, there's something called proofreading. You can read about that in history books. People who are paid to read text and find spelling mistakes. You had to be trained to do it because typically, when a word is misspelled, you see it the way it's supposed to be spelled. You're seeing it in context, you know what word is coming next, and you miss the fact that it's misspelled. You have to be trained to look for misspellings, because you see what you expect to see. If you have a picture of how the world's going to develop, and this is what's sometimes called confirmation bias, then you fit everything that happens into your picture, and you interpret it so it fits the picture, because that's the picture that you have. If the Chazon Ish has affected you so that your picture has a question mark in it, so then you have at least one question mark where you see something coming and say, maybe this isn't what I expected, maybe it's something else. You look at it with a broader perspective, and you're more accurate that way. You have a much more accurate perception of the world that way. So that's the way you try to develop, but your goal is that top. And the person who has the evolutionary picture can't formulate such a goal. It's absolutely nonsensical to him. He can't outdo his animal nature. He can only use one part of his animal nature against another part of his animal nature. And animal nature, by definition, is saddled with all sorts of terrible limitations. And it doesn't have to be that way. So that's a minimal part of the knowing yourself, understanding yourself. Now, here's another one. This comes from a Chasidic parable. It's an actual event that took place. Someone found the Rochester Rebbe once reciting his yichus. Yichus is his lineage, the great people that he came from. My great-grandfather was this, my grandfather was that, my father was that. And the person was irritated. He said to him, you have to make something out of yourself. If you make a great life for yourself, then you made a great life. And if you didn't, you didn't. makes absolutely no difference who you came from. You're not going to be judged by what you came from. You're going to be judged by what you did. So the Rabbi said to him, of course, you're right. You don't understand why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because if I produce a life that's, let's say, very good, I say to myself, having come from these great ancestors, a very good life is a failure. It's an utter failure. Someone coming from these ancestors has to produce an outstanding life, an exquisite life. Otherwise, I'm not living up to the potentials that I inherited from my ancestors. So he was using his ancestry as Musar to give himself a perspective and to drive a harder effort. Now, this has a double effect. Number one, it creates humility in people who come from a great ancestry, that even if they do things which are outstanding, they can't take much credit for it because of the ancestry they come from. How did Moses get to be the humblest of all men? Humblest? So the Ramchal in the Mesilas Yesharim defines humility as not taking credit for your greatness. Humility is not thinking that you're nobody. Moses didn't think he was nobody. He asserted himself in very crucial circumstances with great strength and great positiveness. He didn't sit back and say, let somebody else make the decisions because I'm a nobody, I can't trust my judgment. No. Humility is not being unaware of your great qualities. It's not taking credit for them. The words that the Ramchal uses, I'm not worthy of praise for the great qualities that I have. Why? Because God gave me a particular soul. I was born into the family of the leadership of the previous generation. I was raised in a palace, given a king's education. Why shouldn't you expect something outstanding from me? That's not me. That's just what was invested in me. So the ancestry can be a mark of humility for the person who is who has great ancestry. For a person who's average ancestry, it can falsely be an excuse to say, what do you expect from me? I come from this ancestry. If I climb 10% above my parents, I'm already a success. But that's a mistake. Given what I've told you about the way in which our possibilities are set up, it's not an excuse to say, well, if the place at the top is at 100 and I'm starting out at 40, if I make the 70, I've had a very good, successful life and no one can ask more from me. No, we're being told that everyone can make it to 100. But what he can say is this, that if I, starting from my ancestry, start climbing, and I climb considerably beyond where I started from my ancestry, that's a testimony to the strength and talents God gave me, above and beyond what could be expected from my ancestry. And that should increase my motivation to do more. Instead of being an excuse to do less, it increases my motivation to do more. Mi tein tahor mi tamei halo echad, famous verse in the book of Job, which the Medrash quotes in the Paraduma, in the explanation of Paraduma. Who is it that enables the pure to come from the impure? Is it not Echad, meaning the one of the world, God, Yechido Shel Olam, God who creates the world? God sets up the world in such a way that the pure can come from the impure. You think that the sources are impure, I'm damned, I'm condemned. There's nothing I can do to pull myself out of it. No! Because Baruch Hu put that into the dynamic of the Bria. So a person who comes from modest ancestry can use his ancestry as a motivation by saying, if I started my ancestors, let's say we're level 40, it's normal and average to go from 40 to 60, and I've made it to 70, that means I have greater strength than I thought. That means that God has invested in me more capabilities than I thought. Well then, let's push for 100. Either way, whether you come from great ancestry or the other, it should be a motivation to push, because you're starting with the self-knowledge that there's a place at the top open for me. There's a place at the top open for me. Then that means you understand and you interpret all the things that happen to you in a way other than you might have interpreted them. People, this is a syndrome, psychological syndrome. People want to become doctors and don't get into medical school. So, when they don't get into medical school, The next year is the year of getting into medical school. Because if I'm not a doctor, I'm dead. I'm nothing if I'm not a doctor. I must be a doctor. I must be a doctor. So between now and next fall, there's nothing to do but to get into medical school. That's all. But other than that, there's nothing to do because I'm not now becoming a doctor. They fail the second year, then they may do it for another year. And if they don't make it into medical school, some end up broken. They never take any real interest in anything else. They do what they need to get by, but nothing excites them. And even if they do acquire another focus, it's always with a pain, with a pang. But I could have become a doctor. I needed to become a doctor. I never made it, so on and so on. From our point of view, that's a failure of self-definition. Because whatever path your life takes, whatever twists and turns it takes, that path leads you to the top. Even if it doubles back on itself. It's the long, short road. It's the one that has more miles in it, but it's the one that will take you there in the shorter time. And sometimes the doubling back is the path to the top. If you see it that way, you interpret the doubling back in an entirely different way. I need to learn something from this. My first wife used to say to people who are out on shidduchim, and the shidduch crashes, what did you learn from that failed shidduch? That's what you do with the failure. You ask what you learned from it so that you can do better next time. And the step above that is to say, because Baruch Hu invested the failure in me. He invested me with the failure because I need to learn something. And I have to go through this failure because otherwise it's possible that my whole marriage will be a failure. Better to fail in the shidduch than to fail in the marriage. So, that being the case, it's always upward. You know, it's like when you approach a mountain and you climb foothills, your progress is a zigzag. You go up the foothill, then you go down into a valley to get to the next foothill, then you go down into a valley. When you're going down, it's what the Gemara calls Yerida L'Tzorech Aliyah. It's a descent for the sake of an ascent. You're really getting closer to the top of the mountain, aren't you, by going down? So, you say, but I have an altimeter, you know, and the mountain is a mile high, and I'm now going from 1,000 feet to 500 feet, so I'm going down. But you're getting closer to the top by going down. That's an entirely different picture of what's going on in your life. If you have the Jewish picture of who you are, where you're situated, and what your capabilities are, then you interpret these events in an entirely different way. So I think that Rav Nachman's story provokes very, very profound reflection. Who am I really? What am I at essence? From our point of view is to study the sources on how HaKadosh Baruch Hu created man, for what purpose he created man, and for what purpose the things around us, what purpose they serve. I want to end with one mashal of my own, which has lots of applications, not just here. It does apply here. I want you to imagine an anthropologist who's digging up a human habitation from 4,000 years ago. And he finds clothes and weapons and cooking implements and maybe pictures, he's photographing them, classifying them, and making speculations as to what kind of people live there and so forth and so on. And then he comes across an item which is about 6 inches long. It's shaped in an ellipse, long and thin, 6 inches long and about half an inch wide and 3/4 of an inch deep. One end comes to a point, and there are ridges on the item, and it has several colors. So when he's writing up this paper and investigating the site, he takes pictures of it. He says, it's made out of this type of material, and it weighs this much, and has this much tensile strength, and this is the picture of it. This is, you see what it looks like. We just don't know what it is. We don't know what it is. What does it mean? It's a piece of wood, it has ridges, it has a point at the end, has this shape, this color, this smoothness. Well, you don't know what it is. Well, if you're dealing with something that's made by an intelligent agent, what it is determined by its function. Is it a weapon? Is it an ornament? Is it something you practice woodwork on? Is it a stylus to make marks in the sand? The essence of a thing, its identity is what its function is. That's what he means when he says we don't know what it is. Okay, that's a general remark about the nature of artifacts. The essence of an artifact is the function for which it is created. Now, in these terms, the message of the Torah is everything in the natural world is an artifact. Everything's made by an intelligent agent. So if you don't know what its purpose is, you don't know what it is. You don't know what its identity is. And then you're missing out on its essence. You can describe it all right, but you're missing out on its essence. The Torah, when it gives its description of how Kodesh Baruch Hu created the world and what his plans are for it, is revealing to us what the essences of the things around us are. That means that it deeply affects your orientation towards the things around you. When you learn the laws of sacrifices, and you say certain species of animals are designed to be sacrifices, that changes your attitude towards them profoundly. You probably have heard the phrase meat on the hoof. That's what vegans use to express their despising of people who eat meat. They say this is an animal, and you just look at it as meat on the hoof, something to be killed, butchered, and then you eat it up. Right? Meat on the hoof is a way to look at a cow. It's a way to look at it. Its only function is to give me food. So it's alive, it's dead, how it dies, it's totally irrelevant. Just gives me food. When we learn that one of the functions of these animals is a function as korbanos, as sacrifices, we say one function, maybe the essential function, the most important function is to bring people closer to God. That's the function of this animal. Well, that's a very, very different identity from meat on the hoof, or something to be petted and treasured for its cuddliness, or it's an entirely different essence, and that's what it is, as opposed to qualities that it has. So that's the attitude that we're putting towards the human being, towards life, and towards the elements in the world. If we know what their function is, the function really is to be part of the development of a human being, of his spirituality, to make it to the top level of being a chassid. That's what comes from this story.